23, and this one is almost a continuation of 22, another way of holding things on the lathe. Specifically, today, it's about jam chucks. I want to use three different kinds of examples to show you what I mean by jam chucking. One is, here's a bowl that has been rough turned and allowed to dry, and it's warped and needs to be put back on the lathe. So we'll talk about jam chucking that to get a fresh, clean tenon. The second, I have a bowl here that's been completed and the base needs to be taken off. So we need to find a way of holding that. We'll jam chuck it and do 90% of the work still between centers, but a different style of chuck that time. The third classic jam chuck is the one that's done when you're turning a box. Because in box making, you have a minimum of 2 jam chucks that have to be fitted perfectly and then loosened up later. For instance, the lid on this box right now is, for real practical use, just a little bit tight. So we'll talk about jam chucking here. You want to learn jam chucking, precision, accuracy, start trying to make some boxes. Check my chapter in the book on box making, and then grab some small pieces of wood and make 2 or 3 boxes, and you'll appreciate how difficult it is to get a jam chuck to fit perfectly. Well, let's start off with the rough turn bowl. And for jam chucking this is all I'm going to use. I've got to rework everything inside of here anyway. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not even going to put a pad in here. But what is important is that when this was rough turned, the center of the tenon was marked. So I can come up to that spot. So I'm just going to put it up against the chuck, 4-jaw chuck. Find that exact spot. And I'm wedging against the jaws. They're going to bite into the surface of the wood a little bit, and that's going to give me a better hold. And I don't care if it marks, because all this has to be reshaped. This is only about truing up the tenon so we get a good grip again. If I check this, it appears that it's almost 1/8 or more of an inch out of round. So if I grab this and went back to work on it, it would not be a good hold at all. So I've just jammed it up against the 4-jaw chuck. I brought the tailstock up into the alignment center, and as you can see, this has moved a lot when it dried. This is pear, and being a fruit wood, it's just going to move a bunch. So coming in here and truing this thing up, that's all that takes. Rough turn bolts. Now to finish this one off, to complete this, I want to use something a little bit more safe for the surface of the project than just jamming against the jaws. So I'm going to use a jam chuck. Jam chucks. They are just pieces of wood that have been fitted with a tenon and shaped for various different projects. This is for some other vessel that was made. This obviously is shaped to go down inside of something. You could have used a glue block faceplate combination, but I have a drawer full of pieces like this at home, and when I need a jam chuck, I put it in the jaws, lock it down. Now, I don't care too much about how true this is, but I do care about how true this edge is. So let's clean this one up. Get out my bowl gouge, and all I'm going to do is clean up this edge and this face, and then we're going to then bring it into shape. Actually, it's running pretty true, but not true enough. Now, what I've done is I flattened this and slightly concaved it. Slightly concaved it. I might actually do a little bit more. It's fine, but just you can barely see it, so The purpose of concaving is so that this surface is not touching the bottom of this bowl. I want the contact to be at this edge. Now that edge now needs to be trued. And all I'm really interested in is that I have a straight, clean surface right here. That's a little sharp, I don't need it hard. So I'll break it just a little bit. So now when I mount this on here, it's going to set square to this surface. But I don't want to put it on like this because I could damage the finish in this piece. So I've got to put a pad in there of some sort. Let's look at some of the options. First of all, when we made vacuum chucks, stop for a second there, couldn't think of the word. We use this kind of closed cell foam. And I think this is not appropriate for this because it's too thin and can very easily get cut. So I don't think that's a good idea. Here's a piece of 320 grit sandpaper. Not a bad jam chuck. The felt surface sits next to the wood. The sandpaper side goes towards the bowl. Let me repeat that. Sandpaper to the finished surface. Reason is, if we put it on like this and we're working on the back of this and it slipped, we would burnish a mark into the bottom. If I put it this way and it slips, this is going to slip against that, and the sandpaper is not going to burnish the mark on the bottom of the bowl. So again, into the hole, and we have a driving surface. You want a little bit of pressure on that. I don't want it so much that I'm damaging the fibers by bruising them or compressing them, but enough that this will drive. That's a nice solid drive. And now with this small cone on here, I can work it down to the very, very center. And then I've got a little bit of handwork to do later on. That's one way. This shelf liner works pretty good. Drawer liner if you buy it at the hardware store. Router pad if you buy it at the woodworking store. But that gives you a nice hole. It's available this way. You can buy by the roll. It's available in white. Here's a piece of hard rubber. So if I put this on, the problem is the surface is so hard that it's going to slip against both the bowl and the jam chuck. So this is not okay. So stick with sandpaper, drawer liner, and if I used a piece of just paper like this, not enough friction, it's going to slip. So in a case like this, I would go with one of these options. Probably I take this piece of 3-inch sandpaper, which is just the right size. Slips, a little pressure, nice drive. Jam chucks. Every time I use this jam chuck, every time I retrue this edge, because this comes out of the chuck, goes on my shelf, goes back in the chuck for the next project, and I never get it reseated precisely in the same place. So retrue that edge. So if I'm doing a hollow vessel, a platter, there's lots of other different shapes that we can use. This was made to hold a rounded over end. It's just a piece of junk wood, but it's a perfect jam chuck. It's soft, it's going to flex. Third option is dealing with boxes. As I said before, when we make a box, we have a series of jam chucks we need to make. For instance, we're going to start off by mounting this between centers, marking off the lid, the base, and the bottom jam chuck. Check the chapter in the book on how to do that precisely, but when I part off this lid and work the inside of it, I've got to find some way to mount this to work the back side. So I jam chuck it onto here, tightly work this. And then I can loosen this up later by actually sanding a little bit in here. And then I hollow this out. And to work its bottom, I have to jam chuck it. Well, practice, because you're going to find making these jam chucks is not that simple. It's so easy to overshoot. You want a nice tight fit so you have holding pressure. And then you put this piece on. And it's even too loose sometimes. There are solutions. There's nothing wrong with the jam chuck adapter I have here. That's all nice and snug. I undercut it by a fraction. A piece of dry paper towel allowed me to get back in here and complete this base. Don't make them so tight that you can't grab it and pull it off. If it's too tight, I've had to turn the whole projects away because I couldn't get them off the jam chuck. Too tight. Look how true that's running. Jam chucks. So, one more thing before we leave. I put this bowl back on again because I wanted to show you how to actually cut. The tendency, as with vacuum chucks, would be to cut in a normal way across. But let me suggest that the safest way to do that is to put your tool on the tool rest and try to make all your cutting pressure move toward the headstock, not across. Across with too much pressure can displace the piece and pull it out of alignment. Hopefully it doesn't do that, but it could. So what I would do, I'd come up here with my tool, put it on the tool rest, and make most of my cutting directions toward the headstock. And with this cone-shaped point on here, I can get right down to the smallest nubbing holding that piece in place. But try not to cut this direction, try to cut this direction. There's a couple of tools that work really well. I suggest using a gouge rather than a parting tool. The parting tool is going to have a tendency to cut across, which we don't want to do, and I can't quite get it in a good angle to cut this direction. So I don't think a parting tool is a good idea for that. Can I use a skew chisel? Yes, because this angle is skewed at 70 degrees or so. So when I bring it in here flat and use it like a scraper, I can apply pressure towards the headstock and cut with that. It's a scraping action. It's not as clean a cut as with the gouge. And you notice the gouge I was using was a shallow fluted gouge and not a deep fluted bowl gouge because I want to make smaller cuts. So, jam chucks, a useful way to finish off projects. Next lesson, I'm going to pick up on what I just said about the skew chisel, using it like a scraper, and we're going to talk in the next lesson about misusing all sorts of tools. Maybe not misusing, but using in ways that are not specified in the manual. So we'll see you in the next lesson.